Disruptors and Curious Minds. Welcome to the second ever Thinking on Paper book club, where we are reading The Nexus, Augmented Thinking for a Complex World, the new convergence of art, technology and science. This week, reading chapter 2. Just a little bit of admin. We've had a lot of feedback already from the book club, which is great. People want to get involved and they'll be able to do that. The next book we read, when we have an audience, it will be an open platform. We'll read it together. We'll talk about it together. I think, Jeremy, you have something to add to that as we work this out?
Yeah, I think with our love for emergent things, what we're going to do is probably you'll see an in-between stage of the fully open between what we're doing now and between the fully open version where everyone's reading at the same time and participating. We've got a lot of book club members that want to jump in to this book and have conversations with us too. So we'll probably bring in a select guest or two as we move through the chapters. So, hey, if you want to do that, send us a note. We've got a list of people already that is building. If you want to do that, let us know and we'll bring you in on one of the next chapters.
Yeah, it sounds like a great plan. So chapter 2, what was your biggest impression, take home, thoughts on chapter 2, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think starting high level, we're looking at this Venn diagram of science, tech, and art. And one of the things I pulled out of it that got me thinking initially and early in the chapter is kind of defining each of those things in a connected way. So he talked about science being this mechanic of incremental progress, right? And being something that is open source. It's an open source enterprise. Science builds on old science to create new science, right? And then tech, you have just this disruption, right? Like sometimes old tech gets improved upon, sometimes old tech gets totally squashed and crushed by new tech. And then art, I thought this was really interesting. Like really good art creates questions. I thought that was kind of neat. So yeah, that's kind of where I landed. It was a nice extension of what he teed up in the first two chapters into this next chapter.
Yeah, exactly that. I for me, what I found interesting as well was almost like an art history, science and tech history lesson, whereby during the chapter he essentially explains the journey from Renaissance Florence, which was it was the birth of Nexus thinking, if you like, and the intersections of art and science and technology and all these great minds from that time, from DaVinci and Galileo and Michelangelo, and how they used interdisciplinary thinking because there was no delineation between these domains. I mean, they were all scientists and artists and sculptors and painters and mathematicians and astrologers. And he kind of traces the journey from that to the fragmented technology, art, and science individual domains that we have today. So it was a very interesting learning experience, first and foremost, for me, chapter 2.
Yeah, I mean, we've all, I read Da Vinci's biography that Walter Isaacson did, a few years back, and just a reminder of like this dude was just super curious and super patient with his observations and wanting to connect different things. And he didn't have anyone in his ear saying, you can't do this. You're an artist. You don't need to be messing around with how to build a perpetual flying machine, right? It was just okay to do that. And the school system that we largely all participate in now was developed in kind of the 1800s, far after the Renaissance area, right? But that's when specialization started to come in and say, hey, we need to build a factory for people, kind of. Another thing, yeah.
And just one of the quotes I was just looking for that that Julio wrote. This isn't a quote from Galileo or Da Vinci. It was on Galileo, and it was, having the same image in front of our eyes does not mean that we see the same thing. And I thought that was, as a way of describing kind of your example of how Da Vinci thought about these different things, was pretty very visual explanation of how they were thinking differently to how we might think today.
Well, Da Vinci was very big on perspective, right? And like, just from an artistic perspective, but also like knowing that things are synthesized from different viewpoints, not just art, but topics and tech and all of that good stuff. There was a Galileo thing that popped out to me too, that what he did really well was he enriched his network, and his network enriched him, and that got me really thinking on, the foundation of like Nexus thinkers, right? And the way I think about it is, you can have a first level conversation with somebody, and that's kind of like, you hang out with, you meet someone at a bar, and you're watching the football game, and you're talking about, you know it, you know European football, you're talking about the striker, American football, you're talking about how the quarterback can't throw the ball. But that's what I call like first level conversation, which isn't bad. It's like it's relating to humans and all that. But then you get second and third and fourth level conversation where you're asking big questions. You're not afraid to share a perspective, and hopefully getting the person across from you thinking a little bit deeper, not in a selfish way, but in a way to enrich somebody else, where you in turn can be enriched. So I think it's important for Nexus thinkers to have communities like that, right?
Yeah, like if Florence is the perfect example of that, like the most powerful, creative, artistic, architectural, astrological wonders that came from Florence and not London and not Berlin and not New York or any other city. Was New York even founded then? Yeah, forget that. They didn't have that community like they did in Florence, where it was just this hive of creative minds who had no fear of being, I'm a poet one day, I'm a mathematician the next. That community of like-minded people. And I think there's an anecdote, isn't there, about, is it Galileo who, if he goes to London and he just finds it, like, where are all the people? Where are all the Nexus thinkers? Like, how can I keep expanding my ideas when I don't have anyone to bounce them off? So for sure.
Yeah, and Florence, had this, and Milan was, kind of a secondary little
Nice accent.
the little epicenter, as well. But how much of what happened there, and this has been a large discussion when anyone talks about that time, is like the Medici family and how much their um, financial investment into this sort of sector made it possible. Largely it probably would have happened either way, but it was just accelerated, right? Maybe, I don't know.
You would need to get an expert on the Medici family in, because my knowledge doesn't extend that far. One of the insights that I did have was about when this kind of divergence happened, when was, and the military, like it seemed to be possibly a catalyst for the domains to split off. Was there, the military wanted a specific item or solution, and they weren't so much, and I think that DaVinci was involved in this, wasn't he, where the military just wanted something and it didn't involve Nexus thinking. It was like, it wasn't cross domains. It was like, we need this weapon and we need it now, which kind of was that maybe a catalyst for more interdisciplinary thinking. That's one of the thoughts I had.
Yeah, or maybe a way for interdisciplinary thinkers to earn a little money in the process. I mean, that trend continues today. DARPA, that the internet kind of came out of, a DARPA grant funded project or whatever, right? So,
For sure.
that is a bit of a driver. One thing I really enjoyed, I wrote this word down, I really enjoyed seeing in this chapter, is the word dabbling. Dabbling,
Dabbling,
dabbling.
all the books are dabbling.
And
Yeah.
and you know what? That's what I do. I kinda dabble, and, like, people always ask, "Hey, Jeremy, what do you do?" And then I start thinking, I'm like, "How do I answer this question without sounding like a scatterbrain or whatever," right? But, what I do, and even what I tell my kids, because I've got a kid in college, I've got one in high school, one in middle school, one in elementary school. And kind of the knowledge I'm trying to impart on them is like, find these little pockets that you really enjoy, that light up your curiosity, spend time in them. And then when you're done with them, and when you're ready to move on, you have a bag of stuff that you've learned, right? And experience that you could apply to other pools, right? Without having this I'm going to be this. And I know that when I'm 18, right? You can kind of be around in these different pockets. How do you think about that with your kids? I know we're talking about chapter 2, but like, this interdisciplinary kind of thing, and your kids are a little bit younger, but do you give that a lot of thought?
Yeah, I give a lot of thought about curiosity, and actually, I hack their curiosity. It's like a creativity hack. I hack my kids, and I jump on their why, and I try to be aware of when they're asking why, and try to think more deeply about their whys. And I really love their ridiculous, silly, often like strange whys. But I love the word dabbling. It's like cognitive wandering, dabbling, wandering. It's this kind of curiosity. It's a great word, and wandering is the physical version of dabbling. So yeah, but the kids, I do think about it, and yeah, I try to be inspired by it. I don't know who it was who said this. It was a screenwriter, and he said that whenever he gets stuck on a story, he asks his kids who are like 10, 11, 12, and when his kids are too old, he'll ask his nephews and nieces, because they always have the answer to his problems, because adults never think in the right way. But if you ask an 11-year-old, okay, where's this story go? What's the problem with this story? What should this character do? They always have the answer. So,
well, I think there's a big reason for that. And it's like, it's because as we get older, we tuck away that willingness to be silly. Right. And just to be able to answer a question just from top of mind, connecting something that could largely be totally absurd. But, as a kid, you're not as worried about it. The older you get, ego kind of pops in, and it's kind of like, well, this came in my head, but I just met Mark. If I say this, he's going to think I'm a weirdo. So, Nexus thinkers like to, you probably need to try and be okay with being silly, right? Like being silly is okay.
Yeah. And following that train of thought, in chapter 2, there's mention of the word, and this applies to kids as well, since we're talking about curiosity, labels. And labels didn't exist in Florence. Like, these people weren't an architect, they weren't an astrologer, were they? They didn't have those labels. And when you're labeling, well, you label adults, but if you label kids, oh, he's a mathematician, or he's good at English, or he's good at biology, or whatever, you're labeling them. And I try to be very conscious of not labeling them, and not labeling myself, because I think as soon as you do that, you you put a barrier to other ways of thinking, other thoughts.
Yeah,
Don't label.
Yeah, I think, it sets this thing in your mind that automatically is working against you, saying you can only do this and not do that. And the world, like the large general, the way the world operates, largely in the business sense, right, has, you have to fit into those. I found this out pretty recently. I actually was at a point where my company, Tune Welders, we're kind of winding down my music company after, 15, 16 years. And, going into, hey, do I get a job or do I keep doing some? And I went out in the job market for a bit, and I was like, man, am I a square peg in a round hole? Like, holy moly, I don't have the label that fits into this nice little conveyor belt. But there's got to be a way to open the door for Nexus thinkers in companies, in organizations, and this book, I think, will go a long way into doing that, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an extension of what it was David McWilliams said in that recent TED talk. On thing, can I just read a quote from chapter 2, since you mentioned business in a roundabout way? So, Nexus thinking, interdisciplinary thinking. There's a great example of Uber. He talks about, quote, Uber depends on GPS, and GPS systems calculate positions using highly accurate clocks in space and on Earth. To make these clock words precisely, we need to factor in relativistic corrections, which come from Einstein's general relativity. Okay. But to build his theory of relativity, Einstein had to make use of what was then a new geometry invented by the German mathematician Bernhard Riemann, whom we encountered when discussing visual imagination. Of course, GPS depends on satellites, and what makes satellite possible stretches back to Galileo and Newton. Science technological links are rarely of the type A leads to B and B leads to C. It's a much more like a complex system of braided interconnecting paths. And I think the solution to anything is that a complex system of braided interconnecting paths.
Absolutely. And that was another point I had written down here. One of my, favorite two words, combination of two words is this idea of happy accidents, right? And that's kind of what some of this stuff is. And I remember early on, like this was years ago when I was, prior to me doing Write to Know You, that program that I put together, I did an experiment in writing. And, I came across this framework on how to generate ideas, how to generate creative ideas. And there was this advertising guy that put together a book called A Technique for Producing Ideas. And it involved like just getting a lot of general inputs and then like tucking them away in your subconscious and then doing something completely different and letting your subconscious do some really interesting work, right? Because your subconscious doesn't care about being silly in front of Mark Fielding. Your subconscious is just going to connect the dots, right? So the happy accidents is that's one of those things that you referred to in Einstein and GPS. And then another one was, Kelvin. He was, I think he had said, there was a quote in here, heavier than air flying machines are impossible, right?
Nothing is impossible.
But then it turns out like the work that he was doing in his particular field actually helped make airplanes fly down the road. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to think about.
I wonder if his refusal to believe that this was possible actually subconsciously helped him to create something which was used to make something he thought impossible possible.
That's deep. That's a lot of layers, my guy.
That's a lot of layers. It's a lot of layers. I'm aware of time because the book club's supposed to be pretty short. I'm not sure how long we've been going. I liked a lot of it. And it's made me very excited about what comes next, because essentially this is great storytelling, because he's essentially setting the scene of how hopefully we're going to learn some of the frameworks and techniques that we could think about to pretend we're in the Renaissance, I guess. Like I'm very excited about reading chapter 3 and 4 and 5. The French connection, how did you get on with all the French people? There's a lot of French people in chapter 2. It seems that history is full of French, but both on the art side with Duchamp, but on the science side with Pasteur and Poincaré. And it was good to see the French connection.
French representation. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess a good way to end is with a quote that they used to end chapter 2. Not long ago, art, technology, and science were unnamed components of the same whole, leading to extraordinary innovation. Their transformation into separate domains is remarkably recent. Today, science is about analysis, decomposing problems in parts, rational thinking, logic, convergence, and, whenever possible, quantification. Art is about metaphorical thinking, divergence, emotion, creativity. Technology has elements of both. Only by understanding this separation can we bring them back together in the name of innovation. And I include creativity in that innovation. So, yeah, what comes next is going to be awesome.
I'm excited. Yes. And a quick note to those of you already in the book club listening, if you want to jump in and participate in one of the future chapters, be sure to send Mark and I a note. Like you said, we got a building list of very interested people that are reading this book and jumping in. So thanks for listening. I'm having a blast. I know Mark is. Hopefully you're enjoying it as well.
And if it works out, you should be watching this in an email. So if you just reply to this email, if I've set it up correctly, we should receive your comments. If not, reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter or thinkingonpaper.xyz.
Till next time, everybody. Take it easy.